Hello, everyone. We're recording this on stream right now because I'm live reacting to this news that just came out a second ago. You can check out my stream in the description so you can see stuff like this. Also, shout out to Alienware for being an amazing partner and allowing me to do coverage like this. But the big news is that LCS is back next Wednesday. I know normally LCS is Thursday, Friday. Here we are. It's going to be starting on Wednesday. In fact, it's going to be going on Wednesdays for a while. We'll get into that. But the reason it is starting on Wednesday is because the Players Association and Riot have agreed to a deal. There's still unresolved issues, but a deal that allows the LCS to come back, which is great. We're very excited to have the LCS back. Now, there are several terms which I have listed here. This post, as I scroll up here, you can see, is up on the LoL Esports website. The PA also put out their own post. It's pretty similar on their Twitter. I encourage you to read both of them. I will hopefully remember to put both of them into the description of this video. But you can go look at their terms. I'm not going to go through all of them because that's not going to be a fun video for you. You can look at them on screen or go read them in person for yourself. But the big ones are the ones that I see as one. The NACL teams now must have an operating agreement. So I did not actually know, and I don't know if very many people did know, that the NACL teams did not need to have an operating agreement. What is an operating agreement, you ask? Well, the LCS teams have to, they sign this thing called a TPA, which I think it's updated maybe on a every year basis, but it's basically the agreement to participate in the LCS, and it outlines certain standards and certain requirements and ways in which they need to operate their business and a team and all that stuff. And it just ensures standards, and it's agreement between Riot and the teams. I'm happy. I think this is actually a pretty big win for the LCSPA, because if we are shifting to a world where like the challenger and academy, whatever you want to call it, the tier 2 scene isn't really operated by LCS teams, because while there are 3 left, I don't know how many of those will still be in next year. You want to ensure a set of standards for the teams that are in that space. Next up, you have in this list that players now have protection in the form of 30 days severance and 15 days notice for visa players. So again, we'll talk about this in a second, but the big thing is that I learned recently that most of the players that were let go as part of Riot overnight deciding to not require LCS teams to have NACL teams, they were in some cases getting given 7 to 14 days termination notice. And while for some of you might think like, well, I could get fired on my job anytime, a young person who has like moved to LA and entered into a leasing agreement and basically thought that there was no reason why their season would get cut short halfway through, that is actually not great. So while this unfortunately doesn't do anything for previous players, because Riot doesn't want to give money to players, they always want to give it to teams to give to the players, and Riot can't make the LCS orgs just go pay out extra money to the players they've already let go. At the very least, like, this gives players a little bit more confidence in getting into the NACL, that they are going to have at least some sort of protection, especially the visa part, where you had some players, I assume, who were over here on visas, and it's really spooky when you suddenly lose your job and you're on a work visa in another country. So this, 15 days not a lot, but at least it's something. The other big win that stands out to me on this, and I say win, like, it's a good thing to have. I don't think it's like, aha, we fucking nailed you on this, Riot. But the Riot and the LCSPA have signed an agreement that establishes meetings and parameters before any future decisions are locked and comms are made. So for me, I read that as basically being a situation where Riot is relenting to the idea that they screwed up on the way that they handled the NACL team stuff. I'm very curious if in interviews they'll be candid and admit that, because it doesn't feel like their communications around this stuff has been like, we made a boo-boo. But I think, assuming that this continues to move forward, because the LCSPA tweet calls it a MOU, like they're going to create a memorandum essentially to agree to work together on this stuff. I think that is at least recognition from Riot, like, hey, we need to make sure that we don't just go make unilateral decisions without the PA's involvement, which is essentially what the PA alleged happened in this situation, right? The teams went to Riot, said, wah, wah, we don't want to pay for these teams anymore and these players, and Riot relented without really engaging the PA in this conversation. So, assuming that that's actually a thing that happens, I actually do think that that is, in some ways, Riot giving official recognition to the Players Association as a party that needs to have a seat at the table. Now, information that is not in these posts that I have learned or gained or whatever you want to call it. So things were basically stalled out a couple of days ago, as of a couple days ago, and I think that would have been Tuesday. Yeah, it would have been Tuesday. Okay, so as of Tuesday, things were stalled out. I guess on Wednesday morning, Riot agreed to this termination protection clause. When this was the big thing for the Players Association because there was just a lot of craziness that happened previously. I mentioned previously that 7 to 14 day termination notice situation. So that was a really big thing that the Players Association apparently really wanted to get in there. And after Riot agreed to that, the player leadership for the Players Association met on Wednesday night, and they agreed that the current status was enough to commit to a return without continued public protest from the players, which is, I think, what Riot was worried about. Like, if you're like, we want to bring the LCS back, and then you're going to continue to have the players in interviews being like, yo, what the hell, Riot sucks. That's not great, right? So at the very least, this was a means to artfully and nicely bring back the LCS in a way that people are going to be like, hooray. So after the leadership felt like this was good, they went and talked to all the players, I guess today, which is Thursday. They did an emergency all-player meeting, and Phil, I guess, presented this deal to the players, and they all agreed on it. I don't know if there was a formal vote or not, but that was, I guess, a situation where players were generally on board. There's still talks ongoing because this stuff is not all resolved, but this is my understanding, at least, of how things have gone on behind the scenes, right? That players have mostly agreed this is fine in order to bring stuff back. They're still going to be talking to Riot. I mean, I don't think that 2 weeks you can resolve all this, and quite frankly, it wasn't even 2 weeks, right? Because this all really kicked off last week. But there we are. In terms of the Wednesday schedule, so Riot, I don't think, has this in their post, but sources have told me that basically we're going to have a situation where there are 3 days of LCS a week until around like roughly the middle of July, because there was already going to be a super week during this time. But you now have 4 days of LCS that are not happening, right? Last week and this week. And so you need to move those days that didn't happen over to 4 weeks, essentially, of Wednesdays. So that's what we're going to have. We're going to have Wednesdays and Thursdays and Fridays, which again means that LCS will kick off on the 14th, and that will be their opening day. So that's where we're at. I think there's going to be a lot of debate and argument about whether or not, like, Riot owned the PA, or if the PA, got screwed over because Doublelift said he would play, or all this stuff. There's going to be a lot of conversation back and forth. I'm sure we'll talk about it on Hotline League. People call in. They'll have their takes as always. We'll do that. And then people can decide whether or not this was good or not. I'm sure there's a lot of people who have strong opinions. Regardless, that's the update and some additional news that I've heard behind the scenes. Thank you so much to Alienware for sponsoring. Thank you all as well. If you want to subscribe to the channel, if you haven't already, that's really helpful. It allows me to do coverage and content like this because who knows when the next crazy thing is going to go down. It seems like there's always a new thing. And then also you can become a member of the YouTube channel by clicking the join button below. It's only $2.99. I intentionally try to keep that pretty cheap because I know you guys support me in other ways, but doing so lets you see content early. Anyway, thanks so much for watching, and I guess we're kicking off LCS coverage next week. Hooray!